Thank you for the introduction and welcome everyone to our webinar. I'm glad you decided to spend this Tuesday with us. So the pressure is on me and my team to make sure it's worth your while. So with that, let me talk through what we have in stock for today. So the key reason why we are here today and we want to present this topic to you is if you really look at what's happening in the industry, we keep talking about how the spends are kind of maturing in a lot of areas, how there's volatility in terms of the existing enterprise spend. But when you really look at the heart of it, we have barely scratched the surface in terms of what enterprises are optimizing yet. So several enterprises, they have gone and cleaned out some of their big, more mature functions, but there's so much spend sitting in their organization that is yet to be optimized. And that's the reason why we continue to see year on year, deal after deal, that there's so many new areas that are opening up. So we thought it's a good time at the start of or at the close of a Q1 in 2025 that let's talk about what are those big spend areas which really the enterprise haven't touched and what is changing in our market, what's changing in our dynamics that can allow the enterprises to unlock more value out of it. So to get more value out of their AI investments, how do they improve CX, so on and so forth. So what I and my co-panelists here, we will try to address in the next hour or so is what are those big spend opportunities? What's happening in the industry which allows the enterprises to think differently about those areas? And then what are some of the technology and operational innovation that are all around us, which can really help us unlock the value out of those yet to be tapped out spend? So that's our agenda for today. Hope we have a good and engaging sessions. As mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to type it out on the chat. We also have a few questions that were kind of pre-fed to us in the webinar, and we will try and take those along the way or maybe address it towards the end in the Q&A section. And with that, let us get started. So for those of you who are familiar with some of the research that Everest Group does, so this is a survey that we run pretty much on a quarterly basis where we try to understand what are some of the key trends that enterprises are talking about. And when we really unpack those results, what we realized was there's a lot of areas that the enterprise are just not comfortable talking about. They don't really want to kind of touch it from a spend perspective. They don't want to kind of optimize it because these are really core to how they operate. So things like financial planning, R&D, risk management, sales enablement, they're considered sort of like a taboo topic across multiple industries. And the result of that is there's so much value in those areas which hasn't really fully been captured. On the other end of the spectrum, all the way towards the right, are things which most organizations across most industries find as a very important cost to do business, but not a very critical function for their operations. Think of contact center, running your data centers, executing your accounts payables, receivables, etc., etc. So that's the reason why some of these functions get outsourced a lot more readily as opposed to the ones that you see on the left. But what we're starting to see is there's a lot of different propensity of adoption, right? There are industries and there are clients who are starting to think about outsourcing in this area. So what we'll talk about today is how is that really happening? What's the plan for some of those industries, and what can we do differently to actually kind of propel the outsourcing spend and optimization of the spend in those areas? Chunky, what's been your experience so far around some of these spend areas? Any light that you would want to share for the team for the attendees here?
Yeah, so I think there are two things, right? And you touched on both. So one is that there's a functional angle to it, and the other is that there's an industry angle to it. So, like if I talk about the industry angle, there are a lot of industries which are very mature when it comes to outsourcing. At the same time, there are also a lot of industries who are generally very hesitant when it comes to outsourcing, which could be due to the regulated nature of the industry, which could be due to the ownership structure, as an example, right? So if you look at healthcare provider as a segment or hospitals as a segment, when like in the US, historic or traditionally they've been very hesitant in outsourcing, but we've seen that change over the last few years. We see significantly more first-time outsourcers now than what we've seen previously. So even at an industry level, even the ones which are not as mature over the last 3, 4 years, I've seen significant change and more favorable in terms of outsourcing. And the same is true at a functional level as well. So even if you look at some of the functions which are on the left-hand side of the screen, there are plenty of examples across industries where the outsourcing propensity has significantly increased over the last 2 to 3 years. So those are the two main things that I'm seing. And I think this would be an also interesting topic to get the views of the audience. So maybe let's go to the poll on the next slide. Uh, so this is the poll that we have for everyone, right? So we would want your perspectives on where you see enterprises accelerating services and technology spend compared to the past. And there are five options. So financial planning, R&D and product engineering, regulatory and IT governance, sales enablement, trust and safety and cybersecurity. And while we wait for the results, I also have a question for my fellow panelists, right? What, according to you, where are you seeing the biggest shift? Abhilasha, let's start with you.
Sure, Chunky. So, Chunky, it's a tough one because there are many areas. But if I really have to point out to, let's say, the top two, especially on the list that I see right now, I think cybersecurity and trust and safety is one of the emerging areas that we have seen. And that is valid across the industries also that we have been tracking. For instance, if we talk about retail and CPG, earlier cybersecurity used to be a theme that the retailers or CPG enterprises, they typically used to keep it closer to the chest because of the data privacy, security concerns. But now, due to advancement, even in the ransomware attack, cyber attacks, they have started outsourcing that bit as well. So I would give my vote to trust and safety and cybersecurity.
Abhilasha, it seems the audience agrees with you. We have 55% votes for trust and safety and cybersecurity. And I agree as well, right? Even I think in healthcare and life sciences, I've seen significant change in stance towards spend on trust and safety and cybersecurity. Manu, what are your thoughts?
So the way I would describe it is, I think the outsourcing spend generally follows a very simple pattern, right? There's typically two types of triggers. One is anything which is high priority, high urgency that's happening in your industry. So to Abhilasha's point, with the amount of ransomware attacks and now the whole threat of around how AI can be misused to kind of steal your information, digital IDs and all that, I think it's no surprise that trust and safety, cybersecurity is getting high votes. At the same time, I'd also say that there are some secular shifts that are happening in the industry. If you really look at the whole regulatory phenomenon, right? If you look at how the spends are happening in certain markets, they're gradually shifting towards a direction, and you see some of those kind of dictating the spend patterns. So areas like R&D and product engineering, the reason they're starting to show up is because now we have this whole tools around AI which can help you do a lot, which honestly, till 3 or 4 years, nobody would have thought about actually even using AI to generate code. But now that's happening almost in every industry we can think of. So generally, it's a combination of those two things, right? The triggers obviously work fast. You can expect one ransomware attack, and suddenly everybody's talking about cybersecurity. Right after COVID, we saw all the conversations around business continuity planning. Now it's basically a lot of these shifts happening.
Fantastic. So thanks, Manu and Abhilasha. So I just wanted to shed some more light on the poll, right? And I think across all of these five areas, we see good number of examples across the different industries in how we've seen a change in outsourcing propensity across each of these areas. And I would like for us to talk about a few examples. So if you go on the next slide, there are a few examples that I thought would be good for us to talk about. So across different industries, right? So let's start with life sciences. So across life sciences and more specifically across pharma, there's been a significant increase in sentiment, positive sentiment towards outsourcing. Now, if you look at pharma, the path that it has followed, right? So there were a lot of corporate functions which used to get outsourced, a lot of manufacturing and supply chain which used to get outsourced, then a lot of sales and marketing which used to get outsourced. But in the last decade or so, we've seen uh, one shift that we've seen is that there's significant increase in outsourcing propensity within R&D. And that also largely if you look at R&D, that's largely the D part within R&D. So drug development is where we've seen more outsourcing propensity. But in the last, I would say maybe 2-3 years, I've seen significantly more growth for service providers coming from research. From an enterprise perspective, I've seen much more openness in outsourcing. Some of their, I would say, most difficult and strategic problem statements. So again, if you look at drug discovery right now, there are a lot of pharma companies that are working with their partners on strategic areas like precision medicine. So a lot of pharma companies working with their partners in how they can use AI within drug discovery. A lot of them working with partners in how can they digitize their labs and how can they consolidate the different platforms they have. So generally across life sciences and across pharma, I've seen a significant move in uh, openness towards outsourcing within R&D. Abhilasha, what are your views? What are you seeing from the BFSI industry?
Yes, Chunky, and in most aspects of what you just highlighted, I totally resonate with what we have been seeing even in other industries like BFSI and CPG, for example, product engineering, R&D becoming more open to outsourcing from enterprise lens. But let's maybe expand our discussion beyond new areas, but at the same time, there are a lot of new type of enterprises which are also opening their doors for outsourcing. That's again a very solid observation that we have seen over the years. Case in point being Lloyd's of London, which is an insurance marketplace in London. So it's a very traditional legacy kind of an institution, and it usually operated with more face-to-face kind of an operations mode. And what happened was in the last couple of years, it started facing a lot of backlash and industry pressures due to very delayed modernization efforts that it had and lack of agility. So as a result of it, what happened was they started unpacking outsourcing as one of the levers by which they can turn around the tables. So by end of 2024, now they have decided to outsource a lot of their IT functions. And along with IT and operations, they have also started touching very core functions like change management as well. And they've outsourced it to Accenture, and the relationship will probably start building up, I think, Q1 onwards. So in 2025 itself. But that's a testament to the fact that a lot of legacy institutions are also they have started to open up in new areas of outsourcing, and a lot of areas, core areas which were like change management, now we have also started seeing more activity, outsourcing activity from that perspective. And not only outsourcing activity, a lot of spend, a lot of ramping up of tech spend in these areas. And another very interesting example I would quickly want to talk about would be JP Morgan. So apart from these legacy enterprises that we just talked about, there are these enterprises like JP Morgan who have incredibly high tech and services budget, and that budget is also growing in double digits. So that's again a very solid indicator that new spend themes will keep on emerging as we'll progress. So we have talked about some very interesting examples. Now let's maybe take a step back and look at things in a more focused manner. So we would want to narrow down the discussion on outsourcing, and let's maybe try to identify how big the opportunity is. So if we talk only about services and we are excluding the SaaS or the platform-based product spend, enterprises across the globe, they spend a massive amount on ITS and business process services of the tune of $3 trillion. This is huge. And this is also expected to grow in high single digits now that we are expecting the industry to recover a little bit. So if we look at the overall outsourcing penetration combined for both ITS and BPS, it stands a little shy of 40%. So what does that mean? There's a huge headroom or white space, which are probably the untouched areas which can be explored. Second important highlight specifically on this slide is that we see that IT spend is, although it's a bigger share, from an overall spend perspective, but IT services is a more mature spend area from an outsourcing standpoint, vis-a-vis business process services, which is quite under penetrated, and at the same time, it is growing at a faster rate. So some fundamental reasons that we have noticed would be ITS being a little bit more standardized and scalable. We have seen greater adoption of technologies like AI within ITS service offerings, but BPS requires more specializations and customizations. And it also faces more headwinds around regulations and more customization requirement from enterprises. So let's also try to understand what does that mean for our attendees, for both enterprises and providers. So for enterprises, what we think will happen is that we'll see huge spend in few eight. So in some areas which are more mature, where enterprises they already have an optimized playbook, we'll see more business as usual. But there are some new untouched areas which we discussed in detail a little bit ago, which will start opening up. So enterprises, they would need to think more about the budget planning and reallocation. So they need to stay abreast of all the trends that are happening. They need to really keep a track on how peers are probably strategically embracing this situation and what those best practices can unlock for you. For providers, I think again it's a clear growth trajectory, but I think it's more around the differentiation that they can bring, the domain expertise that they can bring to explore these untouched opportunities. And if we now get a view around how does this penetration that we talked about, it looks like across industries. So, and for next few minutes, we'll be focusing more on BPS side of things, which is more under-penetrated that we just observed. So we realize that not all industries are at same level. And to the point that Chunky had at the initial part of our discussion today, there are a couple of factors which are responsible for this. Those factors would be how much standardization of processes we have seen across those industries. What is the impact of regulations across those industries? All these factors, along with what would be the impact of data sensitivity on the processes across those industries. So these would be those governing factors which towards the end decide how much outsourcing can be leveraged in that particular industry. So basically, at what stage of maturity those industries are. And again, from a functional standpoint, there would be a lot of areas within these industries, let's say customer support in an industry like retail and CPG, which are more open to outsourcing because, let's say, less involvement of sensitive data. But then there would be more core processes within certain industries like banking and insurance, which are highly data sensitive. Those are the industries where we are seeing a little bit of a lesser penetration, but that translates into very high opportunity or untouched areas which can be explored. So before we move towards wrapping up this view, I would request Manu to probably share his cross-industry view over here. So Manu, how do you see the spend shaping up across industries?
I agree, Abhilasha, with your and Chunky's point, right? I think for the audience members here, the fundamental piece we are seeing in the industry is there's still a lot of untapped opportunity, right? Like the previous slide showed that there's over $1.5 trillion worth of spend, which hasn't really been optimized, right? There's not a lot of GCCs operating in there. There's not a lot of third parties operating in there, and even in the in-house way the spend is managed, there are a lot of efficiencies and points of leakage. Now, obviously, there are organizations that are able to do it in-house very well, but majority of the enterprises that we look at across these industries, they haven't. And when we speak with those enterprises, the common theme that we get is, hey, we definitely want to do more, but there are several barriers that prevent me from touching this part of my spend. It could be my comfort, it could be regulatory issues, it could be data sensitivity, it could be a whole host of other things. So what we'll try and do in the next few slides also is kind of unpack what those kind of factors kind of look like. What are those big issues that are preventing the industry from going after these spend buckets? And what is going to really change in this year, given all the talk about AI and so on, which can really help us do look at these spend categories differently. So first and foremost, right? Again, borrowing from the key issue survey I referenced to earlier, this is how the enterprise priorities have been kind of laid out for the year. Again, no surprises. The cost and margin pressures continue to be the prime factor in the industry. The evolving need for CX and customer and addressing customer needs. That's the second one. There is a slowdown in demand, especially with all the conversations around the tariffs that is happening in US. That's likely going to have another dampener effect here. So we have to kind of watch out for that trend possibly moving even upwards. And then comes the point around whole regulations, the geopolitical, and the location risk. These are some of the top five defining factors when enterprises really think about how do I want to kind of optimize my spend, right? What are the areas I want to kind of spend on? What do I want to keep? What do I want to outsource? What do I want to put out in a GCC, etc. And if you really look at how they're thinking and how the overall macroeconomic and the industry factors are influencing their decision, this is what it looks like. A lot of the macroeconomic and geopolitical stuff, it tends to have a much more negative influence on the industry today. Again, think of all the again, I'm going back to the trade war stuff, but there's also a lot of internal wars happening in the world, which means it creates a lot of uncertainty. There's also a lot of countries who are still either recovering from recession or in various stages of recession. That also means that there's a lot of damper on in terms of discretionary spend. There's a lot of curb down on people's ability to spend on services which are non-essential. So that's why you see the industries like travel and hospitality, they're seeing a huge volatility as opposed to maybe markets like healthcare, which is basically an absolute necessity in most geographies. So that's how a lot of these trends are shaping up, how they're influencing how the industries think about their whole spend categories. So I'm going to invite my colleague Chunky. Chunky, how are you seeing some of these things play out in the areas that you see, right? I know you track life sciences, healthcare, a few of the other industries more. Are the customers really responding to these changes? Are there things that are getting more concerned about? Are they getting more concerned about versus things that really figured out that how do I want to optimize this? How do I want to move past some of these issues and really think about optimizing my spend in a better fashion?
Yeah, so I think the main sentiment that I'm seeing is I think the positive influences overweigh the negative influences. So there is, I would say, cautious optimism. A lot of the, I think, optimism is coming from the bottom two things that you see, right? So evolution and adoption of new technologies. So clearly, AI and Gen AI has had a good impact on uplifting the spend, not just on AI initiative, but also on the broader data management initiatives. So I think we did an analysis which suggested that for every dollar a organization spends on AI, they spend about $5 to $7 on data management. So I think that's an area where I'm clearly seeing where I'm seeing some of the optimism. I think the ones to watch out for would be the geopolitical environment, as well as from a US perspective, the government policies and regulations. I think those are some of the unknowns. Why I think some industries might be a little cautious, but broadly what I see is cautious optimism. And if we also look at generally what has been the sentiment and how that's translated to budgets, so if we go to the next slide, we would see that when it comes to budgets, so the majority of enterprises expect an increase in their global services budgets. So this includes both the in-house GBS as well as the outsourcing spend. And if you see the bar chart in front of you, you would see the responses for 2024 in gray compared to 2025 in blue. So I think one thing which is quite clear is there's a significant shift in or positive shift towards in sentiment as well as, and that translates to budgets. So around 18% of individuals mention that they expect their budgets to increase by more than 15%. And this was 6% a year ago. And what that also means in terms of overall budget increases is we expect that within 2025, the global services budgets for enterprises would increase by an average of 7.2% compared to 3.1% a year ago. And this leads to both growth in GBS, so both in in-house GBS as well as growth in outsourcing. And if you look at the numbers on growth in outsourcing, uh, we expect we forecast a growth of 5.3% for the overall outsourced services industry for calendar year 2025. And that reflects a significant increase compared to what we've seen in 2024. So, which was lowest by a good stretch if we compare it to the last few years. So generally, there's a uplift in sentiment. There's a lot of optimism within the industry, both from an outsourced services industry as well as the in-house GBS industry. Budgets for enterprises, as I mentioned, are expected to increase by around 7.2% compared to 3.1% a year ago. And again, while the growth numbers here are not as high as what we've seen in 21 and 22, but again, those years were anomalies. And if you look at growth within the services industry before the pandemic, that usually used to average out around 4 to 5% mark, right? So within 2025, despite a lot of concerns around the geopolitical environment, concerns around regulation or deregulation in the US, we still expect the industry to grow at 5.3%, which has historically been more than what the average that we've seen in pre-pandemic times. So yeah, that's my summary, Manu. So overall positive sentiment across GBS, across outsourcing, and I would say cautious optimism from an overall industry perspective. Now that we've talked about, again, why there are some areas where spend can further be optimized and what are some of the disruptions that are leading up to it, would be also good to look at how do organizations unlock value in these new areas that they're looking to outsource?
Sure.
Sorry.
So a very pertinent point, Chunky, that, okay, we have already established that discounting the recent US policy shifts, we will still see a lot of positive sentiment and a decent uptick in enterprise spend in 2025 and a couple of years later. So let's maybe try to unpack where is this positive sentiment stemming from. So what we have seen to be the most critical underlying theme is that enterprises, they have started preparing how they can do more with less, especially in less mature areas or more challenging areas, which are more like unknowns for them. And broadly, there are 3 or 4 levers that they are using to make these decisions going forward. The first one that we want to talk about is advancement and availability of new technologies. So case in point being AI. So the wave or the S curve that we have started seeing, starting from RPA, maturing to IPA, AI, Gen AI, and probably now moving to or maturing to agentic AI. So while tracing this curve, enterprises have been able to navigate challenges which they were not equipped to, take on earlier, or they were not able to solve for those problems earlier, but now they are, probably they have started exploring new means or ways to solve for those challenges. So there are a lot of areas or use cases that Gen AI probably will be cannibalizing, but a lot more use cases it will be creating, where we'll see a massive investment flow from enterprises. Although the level of adoption or readiness, that will vary from industry to industry, from enterprise to enterprise, but still this is going to be a big spend category that we'll see in future. The second theme that's really interesting is the operating model pivots that we are seeing and how creatively enterprises, they are leveraging that to sort of solve for the issues or the priorities that we just discussed around cost optimization, more standard operations, more resilience. So earlier enterprises, they prefer to have separate tech, ITS, and ops or business process services functions. But increasingly, we have started hearing, can I explore the intersection of all these 3 to unpack more opportunities or to streamline my more operations? Third theme that would again be very critical would be the role of GBS that it will play for enterprises. So enterprise satisfaction with service providers, we have started seeing a little drop in the last couple of years, and enterprises, at least for some functions and across some industries, they have started pivoting to leveraging more GBS. And we are also seeing a lot of strong government push coming from setting up more GBS centers, especially in countries like India, where they are already investing tons of money to help enterprises scale GBS. So that is again going to be a very important lever, which will drive new areas or new spend headers from enterprises. Now we'll unpack all these exciting topics in detail, but before that, we have a quick poll for our audience. And no guesses, again, it definitely has to be on AI. So while we give our audience time to respond to it, I would probably check the pulse of our panel on this. Maybe starting with Chunky and then followed by Manu. So Chunky, how are you seeing AI getting infused in probably the new deals or work streams that we have been tracking on life sciences or healthcare side?
Yeah, so I've seen, I think, differences in like across the industry, right? So across healthcare and life sciences, I've seen differences in how how it's getting embedded. I think generally life sciences has been much more open to adopting Gen AI compared to healthcare. Within healthcare, there have obviously been more reservations compared to life sciences. So I think within life sciences, I've seen more aggressiveness in terms of enterprises uh, asking their service providers to commit to AI-led gains, and at the same time, I've also seen more aggressiveness from the service providers in committing those. So I think a lot of them have been around the 25 to 30% mark. In my experience within life sciences, I would say healthcare is likely to be lower, maybe around the 20% mark.
Yeah, let me build on that. I think I've also seen some similar trends, right? AI has definitely done is it's allowed a lot of enterprises who really didn't think about leveraging outsourcing, leveraging technology they really started thinking the whole way they want to manage their spend better. So it's significantly reduced the entry barriers for a lot of companies to start thinking that, hey, do I want to set up a GCC? Do I want to maybe think about considering outsourcing? So alongside that, what's happened is a lot of these times AI is getting infused into much larger projects. Now, the good thing is if you do AI right the first time, it leads to a lot of big gains, like the 25-30% that Chunky you referred to. The key question that I keep hearing from a lot of customers is how do I manage my customer data, right? How do I make sure that, okay, hey, there's no leakages around it? And the good thing is AI is evolving. With every passing month, every passing quarter, we see more and more evolution of how do you want to keep strict data security standards? How do you want to do more private instances? How do you want to make sure that your customers are not worried about the data getting leaked? Even when it comes to use case around experience, there's newer technologies which are starting to come up. Think of accent neutralization technologies, think of language translation technologies, which is allowing a lot more of the global leverage of these sourcing models to come through. A lot of the work that for which you couldn't find, let's say, nurses in US to support that, now you can do that out of Philippines very easily. Possibly even other locations where you have well-trained nurses, but they maybe were missing that language component that goes in with working with markets like US. So overall, AI and some of its supported technologies, they're shifting the bar in terms of what kind of value they can create, and that's what sounds like is clearly coming out from the poll results as well. So with that, let me talk about, okay, how are we seeing the agentic AI, right? Because that's what really the big topic in the industry today. What's the adoption of the agentic AI? So again, no surprises. Industries like BFSI, industries like healthcare, they right now probably have the highest potential for adoption of this technology. We're already seeing a lot of enterprises starting to get into pilots, starting to get into POCs. There's expectations on delivering high amount of savings around areas like autonomous customer service and process automation, data insights and analytics. So in general, there's a whole gamut of use cases that agentic AI is being explored. And the good thing is we are starting to see some of these actually starting to get into production already. So unlike with a lot of the previous tools and technology where it often took quarters, years, sometimes even decades to kind of get into production, with agentic AI, we are now starting to see production head ready use cases in less than a few months. This technology has been deployed widely. So clearly, I think the journey that all of us went through during the AI Gen AI phase, that's allowed us to speed up the learnings and deploy that in the case of agentic AI. And hence, that's the reason why a lot of this, the promise that this technology offers, is starting to come into production really, really fast. Abhilasha, anything specific that you've seen as use cases, prominent ones in the areas that you look at, or any other call outs on the agentic AI before we move on to the next topic?
Sure, Manu. And I'll keep it really brief. So from a couple of use cases which are very interesting. One would be more of a horizontal use case, which would be more around those pre-built custom assist tools that we are seeing. That is from a more horizontal or industry agnostic use case that we have been seeing. If I talk about, let's say, retail and CPG industry, those industry specific use cases have also started emerging, although at a very nascent stage. A lot of enterprises, they are still piloting those use cases, but we see very high potential of getting moved to production use cases. Those would be in areas like revenue growth management or pricing optimization. And the last one would be more around inventory management. These are the few areas where we are seeing very high potential of agentic AI and already pre-custom solutions being built by a lot of system integrators, a lot of technology vendors who are assisting enterprises in this journey. So if we talk about the next theme that we wanted to unpack from typical levers that enterprises they are pulling would be more around the creativity that we are seeing in terms of moving to new operating models. So ITS and so IT services and operations, typically the trend that we saw was these used to be very siloed structures. Now, integrating them, although is not a new trend, but what we have started seeing is more value realization that enterprises, they have started getting out of it. And the ranking that you see here, that is a testament that how fast it has climbed up the ladder of the typical business objectives that they are able to help enterprises achieve. So if we really think about it, there are 2 or 3 reasons why enterprises, they are doing it. One most critical reason is they want to overcome that siloed operations and drive better outcomes, which will definitely be an outcome of higher intimacy between technology and operations. The second one would be reduced cost of operations. Again, a very clear mandate that most enterprises across industries, they have, and they want to build that muscle to respond very fast to the very high velocity changes that we have seen happening, especially in the current macroeconomic situations. So that is again a very important reason that enterprises, they have started shifting to this model. And the third one, and I think is a more fundamental one, would be the greater accountability that now enterprises would also start expecting from a lot of their partners to have more outcome-based pricing model constructs when it comes to spending each and every penny on these engagements. And there are a lot of benefits also that enterprises, they are getting out of it. So if we look at it from the new avenues of spend that it is creating from an enterprise lens, it would be that enterprises have started exploring newer areas like DevOps. So their spend on this area has increased massively in last few years. Then a lot of new stakeholders, they also emerge into picture. And this is something which is very relevant even from service provider angle. So the access to the leadership or the network of the stakeholders which get touched, that gets expanded. The size of the engagement is also boosted when it comes to moving to this kind of a model, especially from a multi-tower deal perspective. And if we really look at it from some very specific enterprise cohorts like mid-sized enterprises, it's a very solid bet, especially for new outsourcers, because a mid-sized enterprise would definitely want to rationalize their vendor base. So it while consolidating their vendor base and getting maximum value out of it, it opens up new avenues of further exploring strategic levers like outsourcing. So far we have discussed majority of our discussion has been around third party and outsourcing. But if we really have to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the other end of the spectrum, which is GBS. So Chunky, I would like to invite you to share your perspectives on how probably GBS is opening up new avenues of enterprise spend and how their role is evolving.
Sure. So I think this GBS is an area where, like I've seen significant amount of investments across industries. Any conversation that I have with enterprise customers, they are interested in understanding what their peers are doing, where they are setting up new GBS organizations. From a service provider perspective, they are obviously very keen to understand because GBS is also is a new segment for them that they can go after. Right. So broadly across all industries, there's been a significant increase in number of GBS setups as well as expansions in the last couple of years. We've seen enterprises move beyond a lot of the tier one cities where they've largely had more presence, and they're setting up new GBS in tier two locations. Uh, if you look at again from a geography perspective, even in India alone, there have been more than 100 GBS setups that have taken place in the last year, right? So clearly there's a lot of, across all of the different industries, there's a significant move to significantly ramp up their GBS presence. And one thing which I do want to address, right? Usually when we're talking about GBS, like some of the sentiment is like it's either GBS or service providers, right? But what I want to say is it's not a zero-sum game. As organizations, as enterprises are setting up more GBSs or expanding their GBS presence, it also creates opportunities for service providers. In fact, if you look at what are some of the areas where enterprises or GBS leaders want to partner with providers, it's not just it's not just setups in a BOT model. In fact, what they are looking for is for from their partners is partners that can help them with transformation and partners which can help them with managed services and staff augmentation, right? So my I think closing message for this slide is twofold. One is that there's obviously been a significant increase in GBS setups and expansions. And the second message is that that's not just good news for like enterprises, that's also good news for service providers because it creates new set of opportunities and new channels for them. So I think that wraps up this section. If we now move to the other section, right? So we've talked about how enterprises can unlock value. Now let's talk about what are some of the key considerations for enterprises and partners to do that.
And let me chime in on that part, Chunky. So one of the key things that we have seen is with all this change, right? We're talking about new spending areas opening up. We're talking about IT and operations starting to kind of work together. We're also talking about leveraging newer forms of technology like Gen AI, Gen Tech AI. So obviously our old ways of sourcing models can't operate. So the first myth I want to break is I think the age old notion of okay, hey, I want to own everything, I want to build everything myself. That's really not working in this day and age. So pretty much every successful organization you can think of is in the partnership business, whether you like it or hate it. You have to really think about who is the right partner for you, right? Who's going to bring me the best of breed technology? Who's going to bring best of breed services? What are the things I want to own? What are the things I want to put out in my GBS or with the third party? So it's the intersection of a lot of those things that really creates successful business models. The second thing I would also kind of call out is the selection methodology around okay, how do I kind of go about selecting these right partners is now equally important. We continue to see a lot of legacy technology operating in the industry. And at times, it's the cost of doing business. So, who are those partners who can work off of that legacy stack versus when am I as an organization ready to move off that stack and adopt something which is more new? So, finding the right partner who has the right expertise, who brings in the right skills, has the good know how of the technology stack that I am operating in, that's really critical. I think gone are those days where you can just paint everything with a broad brushstroke that, hey, I'm operating on an ERP system, so an ERP is an ERP. Not really the case anymore. every industry that we look at, they have their own versions of customized ERPs. We actually see a lot of industries, not in fact, function specific, organization specific ERPs now being created. So there is a huge proliferation of customization, which means that your partner stacks also needs to be really customized for your needs. And then obviously the whole question around change management, how do you run these things? How do you make sure that your processes are sustainable? There's BCP planning. We don't want another cyber threat, a pandemic, any of those things to kind of come and fundamentally disrupt the way we do business. The last closing point I'll make there, and then I'll invite Abhilasha maybe for you to chime in. I think the way we are thinking about a lot of these tools, technologies, it means that we can't honestly source these things together in the same way as well. We can't expect to have them delivered in the same old time and material fashion. We can't just be hiring people and just paying them by the hour. So we really need to think about what a sourcing model is going to look like. How are we going to contract for these things? How am I going to protect my data risk? If I'm going with a third party technology or service provider, and they, because of my partnership with them, that opens up me to a certain degree of risk, how do I protect the downside in my, both in my legal part of it, but also from everything that can happen to my reputation in the industry? So there's a lot of newer ways in which we really need to think about the design of our sourcing models, our contracting models, etc. Abhilash, I know you track that space closely. What are the specific things that you've seen enterprises do differently, which allows them to kind of contract and source these newer forms of AI and technologies better?
Manu. And that's a very critical question that we keep on getting from enterprises. And I think we discussed the broad pointers or considerations for enterprises, but maybe let's make it more real by taking a very specific example of one of the levers that we just discussed, which was integration of IT and operations. And let's maybe have a more targeted discussion, especially for one stakeholder set, which is very relevant from a sourcing strategy perspective, which would be the procurement leaders. So whenever there is any change in, let's say, the operating model shifts, procurement leaders, they are definitely connected, starting from the very procurement or vendor management perspective to the very end, which would be even the change management perspective. So procurement leaders, they are very important part of this puzzle to sort of bring the actual change of integration. So what we want to probably list here or discuss would be what would be those critical considerations that they should have on top of their mind while bringing about these new changes to probably explore more opportunities that they can have with the new sourcing strategy. So the leaders, they really need to assess how critical that strategy is. So a very open line communication should be established with both the IT leaders and business leaders. What exactly are those needs for those specific functions? And then striking the right balance between global and local needs, right? Because let's say, for example, things like language barriers or language needs, they become all the more prevalent or aggravated when we think about IT and operations together. Then the third more critical consideration that we would like to touch base upon would be how can they unlock newer technologies to stitch this story together better? Do they need to probably collaborate with any external provider for stitching these two operations or functions, for example, any AI provider, or let's say while bringing together the contracts management as a function together from IT and ops lens, do they need to have an AI partner to do that? Then the last bit, and again, a very important piece would be the supplier reassessment, which I think, Manu, you touched briefly, so I will not expand on that. But if we then look about, okay, what does that mean when I look at it from an implementation lens, then again, there are a lot of factors to consider, but maybe let's focus, let's say, on the top two ones, which would be having that open communication channel to build upon. And that cross-team collaboration is going to be very critical from a procurement or a category leader's standpoint, so that the systems, the people, the processes, they all speak the same language. And the second important piece would be the entire process reimagination. So the taxonomies would need to be changed, the KPIs, the KRAs, SLAs, which will get revised after the contract renegotiation, category managers need to really stay on top of all these things if we are looking at actually getting better outcomes of this new operating model. So these would be the key considerations from our perspectives. Now, Manu, I think we are really running on top of the time. I'll pass it back to you for any questions we have.
Yeah, so we actually do have a lot of questions. I don't know how much time we'll have to kind of address all of those. We have about 7 to 8 minutes. Let me try and take a few of those. So one question, I'm going to lump a few of these together, right? So we had questions around, okay, what are the most prominent use cases in CX? We had another one which was about BFSI. We had another one which was more region specific. But the I think the crux of this, if I really get these questions right, is what are those various use cases where we are starting to see the AI starting to become real, where it is starting to have a bigger impact? So maybe I'll provide a big or a little bit of an overall color, and then I'll pass on to my fellow panelists to maybe add some specific examples. So one thing, definitely in the area of CX, that's probably the one area where you've seen the highest adoption for various forms of AI. Keep in mind, right? Technologies like conversational AI had always been around in the CX world for like a long time. So there is a generally a more accepted state of AI in that world. What we saw with newer forms of AI like generative AI is there's a lot more new technology got exposed. So we're starting to see a lot more use cases around, okay, hey, content production and content marketing. We are starting to see use cases around, okay, hey, assisted chatbots becoming a lot better. Now with the whole agentic AI conversation, now there's a lot of organizations experimenting with, can I just take away my whole agents from the CX perspective and make them more like a level 2, level 3 escalation case. So can my level 1 calls be basically handled by the agentic AI kind of tools and technologies? They already know the context, they have access to all the systems, they have the right CRM data there. So they can actually provide you a very good first pass response. So especially use cases which you think are more internal to organization, like think of your help desk IT, that's a place where it's a no-brainer. We have already seen a lot of automation, a lot of these AI kind of use cases, but we're now starting to see that in external settings as well. So again, Abhilasha, Chunky, open question to you. What are those specific use cases that you have seen from the industry that you track, where AI is becoming real, it's getting deployed, and no longer just a POC pilot?
So I can quickly cover one, which would be at an intersection of customer experience and employee experience. That is a very relevant theme that we have seen, especially from a retail angle, from a store operations lens. So that reduces the knowledge latency and sort of enhances the customer experience many fold times. So that is one area where we are seeing actual use cases which have already moved into production from AI lens, and enterprises, they are really betting big on that perspective.
Yeah, from a life sciences perspective, there are a few around personalizing marketing communications as well as authoring regulatory documents where we've seen this move to production. And like there are a lot of other areas where we are still seeing proof of concepts in advanced stage.
I also see on the chat is what's the impact of some of these disruptions that we're talking about outside in regions outside US? So yeah, we talked about tariffs, we talked about regulations and the whole geopolitical stuff, right? So obviously US is going through its own version of it, but what about some of the other geographies? So any perspectives? Chunky, let me start with you, right? You look at areas like life sciences, it's a global market. There's a lot of these changes that are happening across the world. So how do you read what countries outside US are, how are they kind of responding to some of these geopolitical macro stuff, right? Whether it's the wars, it's the tariff stuff, anything else that you see and come up in conversations a lot more.
Yeah, so I think given the global nature of the life sciences industry, right? So irrespective of where a firm is headquartered, any disruption in any geopolitical tension in any part of the world has significant implications, irrespective of where you're headquartered, right? So if you take Novo Nordisk as an example, they are headquartered in Denmark. Obviously, a lot of tensions between, say, US and Denmark around Greenland. At the same time, if you look at Novo Nordisk, their biggest market is US, right? So whatever happens in one part of the globe, like particularly in some of the larger markets like US, has ripple effects everywhere. So so from what I've seen, so again, right, I think the impact that I see across the life sciences industry across different regions is largely going to be consistent. And while there will be some specific nuances. So, for example, from a supply chain perspective, we are seeing a lot of organizations think about a China plus one strategy. So, while there will be differences in how organizations react, I think from an impact perspective, at least life sciences is an example where the impact is likely to be similar irrespective of the region you're headquartered, because the region you serve are likely going to be similar for everyone.
US does has a global impact, so that's not the
Yeah.
surprising part. But since you talked about the topic of supply chain, and I know Abhilasha, you track retail and consumer very closely, and supply chain is like the biggest pain point for that industry. What are your thoughts on what these tariff issues and other things are doing to the global supply chain? And I apologize, but we only have about 30 seconds before we really need to get to a close. So I'm going to put you on the clock.
Yes, Manu, I think supply chain being the backbone of entire retail CPG operations, I think will definitely have ripple effects across all regions. Having said that, the kind of effects that right now we are seeing is more around the enterprises. They are at unrest and they want to spend more on planning rather than actually executing. They have been preparing for it for a long time, but we are seeing more activity around planning. And then later on, we'll see even far effects of far greater magnitude from retail CPG perspective.
Thanks for keeping it short and brief as well. I do apologize for our audience. I know there's several other questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of those. I'll pick one last question because it's also a good segue for the last piece that we had today, which is once you've identified this untapped spend in AI, how do you convince your board to invest in it? So I think that's a very pertinent question, right? So the way we have seen this works best is bringing some live examples to bear, figuring out what the other industry participants or the peers in the industry are doing and showing that as an example. The other part of this is also about painting that picture of what can AI unlock for your board. And a lot of times what you've seen is the strategy that works best is not showing like a 5-year vision, but what can happen through the power of AI in the maybe next 2, 3, 4 quarters. The reason I say this is a good segue also is because we also have an offer for our audience here. Chanki, do you want to kind of roll out that offer and talk about how can audience get some of the questions
Yeah.
clarified that we couldn't take up today?
Yeah. So if there are any questions that we were not, we'll get back. Also, for pre-qualified attendees, we are all giving you the option of reaching out to us and setting up a 30-minute discussion for some of the topics that you see here. So understanding spend patterns across peers, emerging sourcing models, as well as impact technologies such as AI has on sourcing strategy. If you have any questions on these, reach out to us and we'll get the right SME to have a discussion with you. And the link is in the chat. And also wanted to mention that we have an upcoming event in London. So we had our first event in Dallas, which was a huge success. And this will be our second event overall and first event in London. So again, if you're interested, there'll be a link below for more details, and please don't hesitate in reaching out. I would like to thank everyone who's taken out the time to spend their Tuesday mornings, afternoons, evenings with us. So thank you everyone for dialing, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you, everyone.